Welcome back to the Joseph Graham Show. Today I'm super excited. I have Sid Clevinger, and I practiced it like four times before we started to make sure I get it right. But dude, I met you probably 5, 6 years ago
Yeah,
before the podcast, before I had won a bunch of the awards. I had just started working, I think, at Spectrum Enterprise at the time, so maybe 6, 7 years ago now, thinking about it, 2018, 2019 area. And we've kind of just stayed friends and both have actually changed and grown and become different people. But
yeah.
tell us a little bit about yourself and what you and Tiffany are doing there in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee.
What's going on, everybody? My name's Sid Clevinger, and I'm part of what my wife and I created what's called the Cycle Breaker Society. We're healers, we're trauma hypnotists, and like Joe said, like when we met, I was kind of the guinea pig going through my wife's stuff, at the time, and I came through the agency world and was doing a lot of like digital marketing stuff and stuff like that. That's kind of where I come from. And then 2020 hit, and I think, for me being a very, just my personality, I kind of got hit really hard psychologically with stuff, and what happened in 2020 actually brought up a lot of my trauma, that I was just choosing to ignore or able to ignore or numb out. And I kind of went through, my wife kind of took me through a lot of her trauma hypnotist stuff. I did a lot of work when it came to doing emotional clearings and shadow work, and a lot of nervous system work and stuff like that. And I gotten to a point to where I was losing it psychologically. As an entrepreneur, I think I kind of hit a breaking point to where I felt very stuck, and I felt very kind of like, I was very much living in imposter syndrome. I was just sort of like just stuck in this like very dark place, and then kind of secluding myself over and over again. And really since then, I ended up getting sick, and kind of passing out next to a lake that we used to live in Texas. And my wife came and got me, and kind of went. I actually came to Arizona, went to Phoenix area, and with one of my wife's students, and worked with her for about a week, and then came back. And then after I came back, and it just sort of felt like I'd never felt before. It was just kind of like, okay, like screw this. Like at the time, it was just like screw this agency work, and screw this building funnels for people and getting yelled at all the time, and kind of just that constant, just feeling like I was putting out fires. And I was like, I'm done with this. I want to go help other people feel the way I'm feeling, because I honestly felt like I had died and been born again. And and for the past 3.5, 4 years now, I've kind of like taken the agency and the marketing stuff and kind of became the CEO of my wife's business. And now we work on it together. And our whole goal is to help people, break the cycle of their self-sabotage and their anxiety, like I was going through, to help entrepreneurs kind of get through what I was going through with sabotaging myself every day, and just having constant crippling anxiety where I didn't even want to get out of bed. And we found that by doing it, not only for us, but by doing it for now, we've done it with about just over like 400 people. We were looking at a lot of times, like the one thing that kept happening was they kept making more money. So, our whole like thing that we do with now is we're helping really entrepreneurs break those cycles of self-sabotage and anxiety, so they can, we have a whole framework now that helps them double their income.
I like it. I like it. And I want to go back there because I knew you before the process and going through. And like I said, we both, as you've seen when I was on your show, we both have changed a lot. I
Mhm.
think a lot of entrepreneurs deal with this. We get
Mhm.
overwhelmed. I want your thoughts on. We get overwhelmed on getting things right, or being perfect, or making the money, or doing the things, or not being good enough. Because most entrepreneurs have that inner voice of they're not good enough. They have that chip on their shoulder. So how did you? Because you mentioned you worked with your wife on it, but let's walk through that and unpack that a little bit more. What type of things did you guys start doing to help you get past that? Because again, I know you were a super overachiever. I know you were in the fast lane. I know you were dealing with a lot of crazy people because we deal with them together, where they're
Yeah.
still in our circle, some of them. But how
Yeah.
did you start getting past that? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening are like, I'm there and I want to be free from it.
So the first thing that I had to go through was working with my nervous system. So my nervous system was like super out of whack. And for those of you that aren't familiar, I mean, maybe you've heard of the nervous system. Like for me, when I first heard it, I was like, oh yeah, that's something that I learned when I was in like middle school, or heard the name middle school or high school. And that was pretty much all I knew about it. And then I think of the nervous system, and I was like, oh, well, that, I had no idea that my nervous system was actually tied to all of my emotions and all of my feelings. And what I had understood with me is that my nervous system was completely out of whack. I would wake up in the morning still living the same traumatic event that I had never gotten over. And because as entrepreneurs, a lot of times, I think it's real easy for the people looking, and I think entrepreneurs listening to this are going to understand this. I think it's really easy for people looking on the outside in at an entrepreneur and being like, oh, well, it's just an easy fast track. They just took a chance on themselves. When in actuality, I mean, like it's, like people think the arrow is just straight, right? And just sort of gradually goes up, but it's actually like tons of circles and coming backwards a million
Yep.
times.
Yep.
And I think like for me, it was realizing that like I was kind of waking up in this event, and what for me specifically, a lot of my trauma came from my family, specifically my parents. And I had no idea, right? Like, I mean, from the outside looking in, you'd think that I grew up in Eastern Kentucky, suburban family, like a lot of people like think my parents are like the best parents in the world. But I mean, I'm not saying they don't have like great qualities, but they put me through a lot of traumatic events. And I didn't really know what was going on. And, through that, if I took a look back, like something Tiffany was kind of kept help showing me was this pattern. Like, I was having trouble when it came to making a lot of friends. Like, throughout high school, throughout college, I was very much a loner, and didn't used to be like that. I got married and went through this same cycle where I kind of sabotaged the marriage before I met Tiffany. I was getting jobs and stuff like that before I became an entrepreneur, and kind of just going through this repetitive cycle of, well, it'd be so much fun during the honeymoon phase, and then I'd kind of grow to hate the job or hate what I was doing, and I'd end up sabotaging myself to a point where I'd either leave or get fired or whatever it was. And I kept seeing myself kind of following what is understood now as negative loops and spirals. And
Hmm.
so I would just like constantly fall into the same loop over and over and over again, which was essentially the same story over and over and over again that I was living. And it was simply because I hadn't cleared out those traumatic events in my life. And so the first thing I had to do was regulate my nervous system. And, we have exercises and things that we give people for that, take under 10 minutes a day or so. But I mean, a really easy one really is just doing what's called box breathing. I mean, you breathe in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts, do it for 30 breaths. And something that I'm really big on is like when I get up in the morning now, I get up, I take a big old gulp of water. I think some people try to measure it. I have like, this guy right next to me. It's
Yep.
usually
Yep.
about halfway full to full, and I just like chug the entire thing. And then after that, I'll do my breathing. It takes about 10 minutes. And then I usually walk outside barefoot and I stand outside in the sun for another like 5 or 10 minutes. And those are usually like aiming, those are the top three things I'm looking to do because it's immediately flushing my body out with, hydration, oxygen, and then sunlight. So vitamin E, right? And all this natural stuff that's hitting me, which is basically turning on my system. I never did that before. And I never really paid attention to like purposely setting myself up, both body, mind, and soul, into a state of positivity, excitement, like on a good note. I would wake up just completely in defense mode and my
Hmm.
shields are up, my swords are out, and I was ready to fight. So that was really the first thing that I worked on was I had to regulate my nervous system and I had to create a routine around that. And after we did that, the next thing I really had to start understanding was how to reprogram the limiting beliefs that I was having. So then
Hmm.
regulating the nervous system was all about basically, and for those of you who don't know, your nervous system is tied directly to your brain. It's our electronical circuit that's tied to our brain. So our brain tells us how we feel, but our nervous system is what communicates to the brain. So if our nervous system is out of whack, then we're constantly living in this like anxious, depressed state. Right. And I was on antidepressants for a long time, unwillingly. I didn't want to be on them, but I was on them for a long time. And actually, this process helped me get off of them naturally. And I'm not a doctor and I'm not making claims, but I was on them before I did this process, and I didn't need them anymore. So, that's what
Yep.
happened for me. But, once I was able to kind of get my emotions in check with my nervous system, I could start reprogramming limiting beliefs that I was having, and then identifying the root cause of those limiting beliefs, which comes back down to my trauma. And then, we go into then basically clearing out what we call clearing out past trauma. So our inner, which usually comes from when we're ages 0 to 7, clearing all of that stuff out, and then shifting my identity into the new person that I wanted to be. So like that was kind of the steps that I took to at a very large gradual, granular kind of level. But those are really the steps. How to start with my nervous system, how to start with my beliefs. And then once I was able to do that and get myself to a point where it was kind of like, okay, like I'm in control of what's going on in my life every day, at least a lot better than I was. I can then start getting rid of basically the experiences and the traumatic experiences that I grew up with that have caused my beliefs, that have caused this pain. And then kind of, you're able to get rid of the emotional attachment that you have with those. And then, after you go through, like, I went through like my mom, my dad, my sisters, past mentors that I'd had that did me wrong, like stuff like that, partners that I'd had, my ex-wife, got through all those traumatic experiences that I had, then I was to a point where it was like, okay, I don't have an emotional attachment to these things anymore. I can then start working on the things that I need to work on to change who I am. And that was really like the 4 or 5 step things that I worked on. It took me a few months to kind of get there, but then you just sort of get to a point where you're just kind of building and rebuilding every day. But I'm a lot happier. I don't wake up and put my head in the pillow anymore and just like want to go back to sleep. Like, I mean, there's so it's a lot lighter feeling. Like I feel a lot lighter, but I also am just a lot more energetic, and just by default, you're a lot happier, and you kind of have a lot more clarity around what you want to do, which helps you kind of slow down instead of like constantly feeling like you're running, running, running all the time. So it's really
I
helped
love
me.
that. I love that. I think, and I'm listening to a few things because I find this funny. I didn't know, like I know I've heard about the nervous system, but I didn't like really like look into it. But I know I get up every morning and I try to walk. I try to get in the sunshine.
Mhm.
Like I need that. Like I get up, I drink water, I get in the sunshine. When I'm going for my walks by myself in the morning, I'm doing gratitude or praying or whatever I'm doing, speaking positivity to myself, getting focused for the day. And I can tell the shift. So I can tell when I don't do it. When I don't do it, I'm grumpy, I get overwhelmed. I do high pressure sales job. So like
Yeah.
I'm always in that environment. So there's days that I'm just like, oh, I need to take a break. And I've done box breathing before, but I didn't realize that that was affecting my nervous system. That's just trying to calm myself down. So that's very interesting. And then you talked about dealing with your crap, which everyone has. Anyone listening to this show, you have crap. You have stuff you did that was your fault, someone else's fault, and stuff you couldn't control at the time. However, you're responsible for moving forward with it, how you deal with it going forward.
Oh,
So I
absolutely.
loved how you went through there. Go ahead, go ahead. You were gonna say something.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. I mean, I didn't believe it either. I thought Tiffany, thought my wife was kind of, and I think she's going to be on the show. But funny story we had
Mhm.
between us is when I first met her, like a couple of weeks, I was like, I asked her, I was like, "So are you a witch?" And it's just this funny thing because I thought what she was doing was like weird. At the time, I was like,
Mhm.
"This is weird." Like this doesn't make any sense. But then I kind of just leaned into it, and like you said, I mean, it. I think when you start feeling better, I
Mhm.
think for a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, we don't like to feel like we're stuck. We like to feel like we're making progress every day. So I think there's a big ego check when you get into this type of work because you kind of have to rip that apart, right? You got to take off the mask and actually look at yourself. And I think like that's probably the scariest part. But you can realize, like I learned, what was it Hermosi said? And I don't even think it was his, but he said something that really resonated with me that I was listening to one day where he was talking about fear, and I was actually going through a part of this kind of ego check when I was going through this, and it was fear for a lot of people. He talks about how what is it like you can get like more proficient than 80% of the people doing a task if you put 20 hours of targeted work toward that task. But most people's challenge is they're so scared of what it is that they actually take years to start that first hour. And then on the
Yep.
back side of that, he talks about how most of the time people don't take steps toward that first hour because of fear. But what he's realized over the years, and what I've now came to realize over the years, is that fear is normally a mile wide, but it's only an inch deep. So I feel like it looks a lot bigger than it is, but like every single thing that I was even partially scared of, just kind of leaning into it and stepping into it,
Mhm.
I realized that a lot of times it was kind of like a mirage or an illusion because it would look like it was like forever wide and there's no way I'm going to be able to cross it. But in actuality, you couldn't see the depth of it and it was very shallow. So like it would be real
Yeah.
easy once I kind of jumped in. Like you saw the school community, right? So like,
Hmm.
we have a school community called the Cycle Breaker Society. When we started that community, and I remember we had been in Kajabi, we had been and had an app for a while. And so we had had something built out for a long time. And then we had made a decision to go over to school because, I mean, there's a lot of eyeballs on school, and it just seemed like it was a little bit easier to kind of like keep a community active, right, and engaged.
Hmm.
And that's what we were really looking for. And so I was like, we're going to school. I'm gonna figure this out. And I remember when we first opened the school account, and this was just a few months ago. We first opened the school account and I looked down at it and I remember I just saw Cycle Breaker Society and our logo, and then everything else was a blank. And I just remember looking down at it and I was like, what the hell did I just get myself into? Like all these emotions that I used to have
Wow.
started flooding back, the imposter syndrome, the anxiety, the self-doubt, like all of this stuff started flooding back. And I remember a lot of it came with the fear of like, holy cow, like now people are going to watch me again. And I haven't had people watch me like build something, like improve that I'm as good as I say I am, or am I full of shit, like, so I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of sitting there and then all of a sudden, questions, 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 am I, can I, were going through my head. And I just remember I sat down and it was like, we have a 2-year-old. So we had just put him to bed and it's like 10 o'clock. And I remember I'm going to sit down and I'm going to get like the first layer of, so the way my brain works is like, I got to figure out the foundation, right? So I got to figure out what
Hmm.
do I want, work backwards. And then the first layer of what we work on is the foundation, the building blocks, right? So I'm like, I'm going to sit down and figure out what this is. And I remember like just by doing that, I was then able to wake up the next day and have more clarity and more vision, and the next day and more clarity and more vision. But I definitely went through that oh shit moment. Like, what did I get myself into? Can I actually do this? And I think it's normal for people. It doesn't matter because
Yep.
every level there's a new devil, right? So I mean,
Hmm.
like we were just leveling up, and I was having to like sit there and say, all right, like, do you believe in yourself? And even though the questions came, because I had these tools, especially with the nervous system, I went outside, did a breathing exercise. It wasn't box breathing, it was something else that we call the psychological sigh breath that I do 20 of. And did that and just sort of like pulled
Hmm.
myself together and then just went inside. And I'm just got a notepad, got my notebook, and just wrote down, okay, this is what we want this to do for us. This is where we want to get to. What do I need to build to make that happen? And I remember just
Yeah.
like breaking that down step by step. And as scared as I was, I realized we had everything already there. It was just me in my own head, which was causing feelings and emotions that honestly weren't real.
Which I think a lot of entrepreneurs run into. And when you said that story, I had heard another buddy of mine talk about it, and he was like, entrepreneurs try to flow upstream, and sometimes you should just flow with it. And then he said, a shaman or someone had said, no, dude, the water's only an inch deep. You just need to stand up and walk to where you need to be instead of playing the game that they're playing. And he's like, holy crap. And that's what I was picturing when you were saying that's like, no, you just need to stand up and understand that you have it. Like when you did the school thing at first, you're like, okay, cool, I'm doing the school thing. You're getting overwhelmed in your head. Then all of a sudden you went back to your modalities, you went back to the things that you knew you needed to do. And it's like, no, wait a minute, I got this. I've already dealt with this before. And I think sometimes we just have to remind ourselves of the tools we have and use them. And then something else you said earlier too, the old ways aren't always bad. We put weird words on, like you said, you thought your wife was a witch, which she's not. But you
No,
thought that
she's
she was,
awesome.
right? Right, right. She like I've worked with her on some stuff too when I first started out. Like her stuff works really well. It's great. But I think sometimes we don't understand it. So we will put a label on something when in reality, once we understand, oh, wait, this just means this. I'm going to regulate my breathing. There's nothing weird about that. I should do that. I'm going to get into sunshine. I should do that. And I think the problem, like you said, a lot of entrepreneurs have this issue. We have that chip, that wound, that burden, and we have to sometimes let it go and just shine our light and be who we're supposed to be, which is not easy because then we're afraid, well, what if they see us? Well, good, they should see you because you're not the person you were 5, 6 years ago. So I just
Yeah.
kind of want to encapsulate what you said there because I think so many times we think it's perfection when in reality it's 1% better, helping who we can, and the right people are going to come into our world.
Absolutely. I mean, like you had kind of mentioned it in the beginning, but we live in the Smoky Mountains now. So we
Mhm.
live about, I don't know, we're about probably 30 minutes, 35 minutes south of Knoxville. We're just outside of a town. We're literally in between. Maryville and Townsend, and our property. We're on 97 acres out here, and our property actually backs up to Foothills Parkway, which is the official start of the park. And so the reason I say that is just to kind of give people kind of an idea. We're very much in the woods, we're very much in the hollers and the woods and the mountains out here. But we used to live in a concrete jungle. Like we were looking at pictures on, how Facebook comes up with the memories or whatever. And Tiffany hopped on and was talking to somebody, and one of the memories popped up. And it was us living in Dallas, where we used to live, about 250 feet in the air. Um, right next to the Double A Center. So right next to American Airlines Arena,
Hmm. Yep.
where the Mavericks play and the Stars play. And we were literally living, like, my window looked over top of American Airlines every day. And we would just walk 2 blocks, like, to go to these games, and everything was a concrete around us. Like, it was very little nature. And it was just very, I mean, even though Dallas has definitely like gotten a lot busier in the past 4 or 5 years, like when I lived there, it was still crazy busy. We were still getting 500 people a day moving from California to Dallas alone, not to mention the border and everything else. So I mean, it was nuts. Like it was just people moving in from everywhere. And then we moved here, and I remember when I lived. So a lot of these challenges that I was having happened when I was in Dallas. And then when we moved here, right, obviously I was able to work through a lot of this when we were in Dallas. But then when I moved here, and it was just like simpler, like the environment was just simpler. And granted, like we pretty much live in a rainforest. So, I mean, we're surrounded by
Hmm.
a lot of trees, which provides a lot of really good oxygen and all that. But I mean, like just being here in this very, very simple place, where I was telling you before, like we're literally right on the edge of the grid. Like our
Hmm.
property has one of the electronic or light poles that's the last on the grid before the park. So we're literally just like kind of here, and there's not a lot of action that happens here. It's not very busy, but we're surrounded by nature. We're surrounded by nature sounds, lots of birds. We have rabbits and squirrels and bears and coyotes that we hear at night. I mean, all that stuff happens. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, it became a lot easier when I lived here. And I think the reason I bring that up is because I really think that your environment that you put yourself in every day is so huge. I think when people talk about environment, they talk about people. And yes, that is true. But I also think like our state, like Tony Robbins talks a lot about emotional state.
Yeah.
So, like, I think our emotional state is very much anchored back to what we purposely put ourselves in every morning. So if we're purposely doing the breathing, doing the things we know we need to do, the water, the breathing, like exercising was huge for me. Like I started cycling when I came down here, and like that's been massive for just my mental health, because like I'm out in nature for 2 or 3 hours, every few days. And I think when we purposely put ourselves in the right positions to do stuff, it becomes a lot easier to accomplish the things we want to accomplish. Whereas I think a lot of people, we talked about going against the grain earlier. I think people just put themselves in really shitty situations. And then it makes it 10 times harder to get through something because you're putting yourself in this situation. And I think we can look at that in a lot of different ways, right? Whether it becomes who we're hanging around, what we're hanging around, what we're putting in our ears or eyes. I mean, like, what was the stat? Like the average American, I think, spends 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours on scrolling a day now.
Hmm.
And so, like, you put yourself, I learned when this came out, and I know you get this because you're really good at it. I mean, for anybody that doesn't know, like, I could hop on 10 profiles right now that are not mine and scroll for like less than 30 seconds, and I would see Joe. I know I would see Joe because I've seen it. I've seen it happen before. He's that good at this. But I think it's really easy. Like when you get onto social media, if you're not careful, you realize you're kind of entering into a psychological and digital world that's craving your
Yep.
attention.
Yep.
And if you're not careful, you get sucked into that world. And it used to just be Facebook. Like remember, like 2016, 2017, like it was Facebook and Facebook only. And then Instagram came and LinkedIn came and Twitter came and YouTube came. YouTube was there in 2014, but now it's, I mean, my son, watches YouTube. He doesn't watch TV, he watches YouTube, he watches Blippy. So I mean, like, we look at that, and I think if we're not careful, like that's what's gonna our what we see and constantly are around is who we're going to become, right? So like if we're looking at social media, and I think you would agree, so there's just a lot of hate and a lot of division on social media. So like if we
Yeah.
allow ourselves to get into that, then that's kind of who we become. But if we put ourselves in the right positions, And yes, that can be people, but for us, it was the right environment outside. I mean, I
Mhm.
keep looking outside because I'm just like, oh man,
Yep.
outside's awesome. But like we put ourselves in those types of things, then all of a sudden, not only we feel better, but you'll see a shift in who you become and what you want to do and what you're about and in your everyday kind of like being because of what you're around every day. I think that's so
Mhm.
important. It was such a huge shift for me. Us moving out here was such a huge shift for me, and it really helped
Dude,
me.
us moving to Phoenix was the same thing. Now I'm still in a big city, but I'm on the edge of Phoenix, so I see mountains every day. The path I walk on, I can go to where I can look in this one direction. I see no buildings because there's a runoff or a park or something for miles that no one can go there, and I can see mountains because for me, I need nature. I totally need nature.
Oh
There's
yeah.
hiking trails close by. There's things. Now, would I want more trees? Yes, but my wife likes the desert, so it's cool. It works out.
It
You know,
has
you
its
you balance
own
things out.
ambiance. It has its own
But yeah,
ambiance. I really enjoyed it
but
out there.
it's still interesting because you go and you look, and like when I lived in Dallas Fort Worth, because I did this, well, I would walk through the parks, but you get out of the parks and you're surrounded by stuff again. But here, like I literally can just drive 10 minutes and go up in the mountains, and it's like there's no one around. It's just like you, God, the universe, however you want to put that, and you're just like in awe. And I'm just sitting there going, I didn't know I needed it until I needed it. And I think that's kind of what happened with you. You didn't know you needed it at that point because you're like, I'm in Dallas. I can see the American Airlines. I can do all this stuff. It's great. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, what do I need to wake up to a life I love living? And that's what
Mhm.
it sounds like with you. So you guys went from Dallas and you bought 97 acres in the Smoky Mountains and are doing all these things. How did you was that something that you and Tiff just both agreed on? You and Tiffany both just like both felt the need, or did one of you think of it first? And how did you guys even make that move? Because that's I've done two big cross country moves. You
Mhm.
don't just randomly one day get up and just do that typically. Maybe you guys did, but normally you got to plan it out a little bit. So what made you guys make that shift there?
Well, I mean, we had just had a son. So, and just to be
Mhm.
clear, because I don't want to misrepresent, we live on 97 acres. It's conserved land. So we don't technically own it
Oh,
because it's
sorry, that was my
conserved.
my
Yeah, I
messaging.
just want to make sure there's no like misrepresentation. But yeah, I mean, we live out here on this land, but a lot of the land out in the Smoky Mountains is conserved because people don't want it to be bought; they want it to be
Mhm.
preserved. So we're on conserved land, but we live out here. I mean, it's the same thing. We just don't on paper like own it.
Gotcha, gotcha.
But anyway, so yeah, just so there's no technical. I don't want anybody coming on your show being like, he didn't do this. And I'm like, well, technically,
Yes,
but
we
anyway,
we cleared it. We're good.
yeah, we're good. All right. So we were living in Dallas and we actually had moved to a house. So 2020 happened and I got put in mask and I started really having issues. And we lived in a building at the time. It was a different building than the American Airlines Arena because when you're living downtown in those buildings, I mean, you kind of move every year, every couple of years. And so we were living in a building that was actually close. You remember Clyde Warren Park downtown? We lived in 1900 McKinney. So we
Okay.
lived on McKinney Ave and we were over ours, like we had a patio. So like our patio, we were 12 stories up, looked over the park. So we would go to Clyde Warren all the time. And like that was like a daily thing for us. Like they had restaurants up and right there, everything we needed was within like 3 blocks. We had a Whole Foods, we had our restaurants, we had our park. We had if you remember the walkway that would go up to the really nice, I don't really drink anymore, but I used to do it a lot. Up there was a
Mhm.
bar, and you could hop downtown Dallas, and you could walk on this kind of like nature path. Forget what it was called. We used to walk, I mean, it was all like right there. So you could just do everything. And then when 2020 happened, I've never seen something like this. Like literally, it was like overnight. I remember we were watching or listening to something around like, we gotta, lock down or whatever. And we woke up the next morning and Dallas is a pretty lively downtown. Like there's a lot happening down there during the day. And we woke up the next day and it was like a ghost town. It was like the weirdest thing ever. It was like an abandoned ghost town. And it was like
Mhm.
that for a while. And we had found out that about half of our building had left, and we wanted, do some smaller thing. They were doing construction on the building and jackhammering in the building. We couldn't work. Like, it was just a lot going on. And we ended up like, anyway, breaking our lease and moving to a house. And we lived in that house for a while, for a few years. But if you, again, you come from Dallas, our neighbor was about that far from us, maybe a foot.
Yep. Yep.
And we
Yep.
lived on I think it was like 0.17 acres. So we had a 2,500 square foot house on 0.17 acres. And I'd walk outside and my yard was like 5 feet
Hmm.
like in front of me. And then our front yard was pretty much non-existent. And then it was just the house. And then we were surrounded by a bunch of people. And so like it's kind of the same thing, except you're in a standalone house instead of you're in a building. And it
Yep.
was just constant over and over. And we ended up getting pregnant and having Chad when we lived there. And there's just, I mean, we're not very big we're not really into politics, but I mean, like, there was just some really negative stuff happening with it being a big city. Like, there were bricks that were getting left, big piles of bricks that were getting left, like within a mile of our house.
Yeah.
We knew somebody that had gotten jumped in a Walmart parking lot, a woman and her kid, and, that was going on. And it happened like at the Walmart that was just like the one that we went to. And it was just kind of like, holy cow, like, and we were first time parents, so we were like already stressed out enough about having a kid. And it had always been our dream when we first met, our dream, we had said this to each other. We sit down, Tiffany's a very Excel spreadsheet type of person. And she did the exact same thing with me when we started dating me. Like, I got to check off all the boxes, right?
Yeah.
And we sat down and we had a comment. I promise, like, this all has a point, but
Are you
we
good?
sat down, we have a conversation. And she said, one of like my lifelong dream is, obviously I want to help a million people, help heal a million people. But part of that is I want to have a healing ranch, and I want to, I want to have chickens. I want to have chickens. I want to have animals. I want to have bees. I want to make honey. I want to do medicinal plants. So when you talk to Tiffany on here, she'll tell you a little bit more about where she's from, but she's from Canada. She's from Calgary, which is right next to a place called Banff, which is a national park up in Canada. It's right above Montana. And so when we were looking, we looked at Austin for a long time. We took a really hard look at Austin. And then ironically, because we had just had Chad, our son, my parents at the time were like, we want to be close to your son. So we would like it if you would move closer to home. And we had never even considered it. And then finally we just kind of looked at each other one night and we were like, well, Texas is getting really expensive. Why do we
Hmm.
even really live out here anymore? Like, what's keeping us here? Like, we both came here for a specific thing that ended. We met each other. We've kind of formed this new life together. Why are we in Texas? So we took a really long, hard look at that. And then we kind of reverted back to what we said we wanted to do when we met. And we kind of looked down and said, where's the best place we can do that? And, I had always visited, so I'm from Eastern Kentucky. I'd always visited the Smoky Mountains a lot growing up. And I say a lot, but a few times, enough to remember that we really liked it. And about a year before we moved here, we had went to Gatlinburg with my family, and Tiffany loved it. And so we kind of looked at each other and we were like, well, what if we moved to Tennessee? We don't know anything about it. We've been there to Gatlinburg on vacation and Pigeon Forge to go to Dollywood. That's
Yep.
it. So we didn't really know anything about it. But hey, I moved to Texas and I'd never been west of the Mississippi. She moved to Texas and she had barely been to the States. So I mean, like, it was
Hmm.
part of the core for us. So for us, we were like, we don't have any idea how we're going to do this. So we just sort of sat down after that night and we're like, okay, we're going to move to the Smoky Mountains. We sat down and we just said, okay, what do we need to do? We liquidated everything, kind of like had a digital garage sale, like literally gave away like $1,000 TV for 20 bucks, like literally stuff like that. Just got rid of everything that wasn't going to go. And we were just like, we're going to plan on changing our life in East Tennessee. And ended up moving to Kentucky for a transitional period because we couldn't get back and forth, right? Like we were 1,000 miles away, so we couldn't look at property. Um, and then we ended up going to my parents' house. But here's where it gets crazy. We go to my parents' house. So my parents are like, listen, we want you to move. One of the things that they said they do if we move closer to them was that we wanted to build a house. We wanted to buy land and build a house. So they were like, okay, so we're wanting to get into real estate investment. So we'll do that with you and we'll make it easier for you. So we'll help you get the loan. We don't, we, you know, we didn't need any money, but I was like, if you could just help me get a better rate on the loan, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Okay.
So they had agreed they were going to do that. And we came down here, and something you might know about Eastern Tennessee, or some people might know, things go really slow here,
Mhm.
really slow. Nobody's in a rush. And so we didn't realize that. So when we came here, we moved, and it was right before Thanksgiving, and it was just going a lot slower than we wanted it to. So me and Tiffany started trying to force it. We started creating Excel spreadsheets. Tiffany started creating Excel spreadsheets on properties. And I remember one week we came down and we looked, one weekend we came down and we looked at like 40 different properties. So all these things that we were doing to try like find a property, build on the property, like all that stuff. And we get to a point to where we're like, okay, we found a property we want. We have the house that we want to build, which we were going to build an A-frame. So we had all this stuff in place. Anybody that's ever went through a construction loan, it's an absolute pain in the ass. Like, holy
Yep.
cow, like it's
Yep.
not fun. And we finally get everything to where it's at, and we just got a point to where um my parents were going to help us with the loan. So we had like the loan documents, we're ready to like get going. We have to do all this stuff with the money and the escrow and the builder and all this crap. So I'm just like, okay, let's get this taken care of, on to the next thing. And we had been there for 4 months. So as a 35-year-old dude living with his parents, like I did not want to be there. Like I wanted to get
No, no,
out.
I got you. Yep.
Yeah. And we're sitting at the dining room table, and all the shit that I went through with my parents growing up kind of came to fruition. And they just kind of looked at me and they were like, well, we'll think about it. So completely changed their tune. We're now don't have a place to live. All this stuff's going on. And we're trying to get out of there as fast as we can and move to our own place. And they look at what they said they were going to do for us, and then they just sort of like change their tune. And they're like, we'll take a look at it.
Hmm.
And then the next day, we confronted them about that. Next day, I found out that they had decided to do an Airbnb project with my sisters, even though that they had said they
Mm.
were going to help us. And so the way that I found out was they didn't even tell me. They were reaching out to Tiffany, and they were asking Tiffany to help them with the loan paperwork. So they were telling me for 4 months that they couldn't help me for this, that, and the other, and all these excuses. But they had actually decided to help my sisters, and were able to get that loan paperwork together in under like 12 hours to get a house.
Yeah.
So they completely lied to me, to our faces, with a 7 month
Hmm.
old. And we confronted them about it the next day. My mom was like, well, we're not obligated to help you. And we were like, well, no one ever said you were obligated, but you said you would, right? We moved here
Yeah.
based on your word.
Yeah.
And that argument ended up having them kick us out of the house with a 7 month old baby. And they had moved. So this wasn't the place that I grew up. So like this was in a new place. I didn't know the place very well. It was in the
Hmm.
fall. So there was a football game going on, a University of Kentucky football game. So all the hotels were packed. You couldn't just get a hotel. And so we ended up having to come to East Tennessee. We decided we're just going to go to East Tennessee, where we had looked at moving, and we're going to get an Airbnb down here, and we're going to stay for three
Yep.
or 4 days. So we ended up staying for an entire week, did our own stuff, and we found the place right now, and we found the land right now. And I was just kind of like, F this, I'm just going to do it by myself.
Hmm.
And so interestingly enough, like even after I went through all those tools, I think it's so interesting because if I hadn't went through the tools with Tiffany before this happened, I would have folded and probably would still be living. We probably would still be living with my parents in a really crappy situation, or we would have not ended up where we're at. But because I had those
Hmm.
tools, it really helped me kind of like compartmentalize what was going on and be able to like shut off emotions that would normally come to
Hmm.
fruition when I would get pissed off. And I was able just to be like, okay, like this is what's going on, but this is what I'm focused on and I need to do. And I didn't allow that
Yeah.
to sabotage myself. And so that all happened. And then we found this land. Like I said, it's conserved. So we had to come and talk to the people who had conserved it. And, there's a whole process with that. Um, but we came here, and we were able to get the land and we live in a house that was on the land already. And we were able to get here in like 2 weeks after that happened. And,
Hmm.
that was kind of how we ended up here. But it was interesting because it definitely wasn't planned this way, but we think it's kind of what God had, had a
Hmm.
plan for us to do. And
Yep.
looking back, it's interesting because like, we wanted to get into Airbnb. There's an Airbnb on the property here that we manage. So we've been able to like, get experience doing that. Tiffany really wanted to get into gardening and get into like stuff with animals and stuff like that. So we've been able, our neighbors do that, and then we also are able to do that on this land. So like we've been able to almost like run a trial and understand how to take care of 97 acres,
Yep.
right? Which is really going to help us when it comes to like, wanting to go out and do something bigger in the future if we decide to. Because like we are on 97 acres, but about 92 of the acres are a mountain. We have
Hmm.
3 miles of hiking trails, like right off the
Oh,
driveway
nice.
here.
Yep.
There are old logging trails. There's a mountain pond up there. It goes up like the top of what we call Little Mountain. It's about 800 feet up. So like, even though we live on 97, a lot of what the property is maybe 5.
Hmm.
So it's just interesting because like I think a lot of times we try to force things. Like I really was trying to force something that God didn't have me wanting to do
Yep.
until I just sort of let go and use the tools that I had and was like, okay, I need to set myself up for the best success, but it's going to fall in my lap.
Hmm.
And like exactly what we said we wanted fell in my lap, and it was because I let go and used the tools that we used to kind of stop sabotaging myself, and we ended up in
I
this
love it.
place.
I love that because here's the thing. Things happen to us at times, and how we respond determines the outcome. You
Mhm.
understand and you learn the principles now that things aren't happening to us as much as things are happening for us. Like you said, a few years ago, 5, 6 years ago, Sid would have went off or folded or went back into the old patterns, the old circles we were talking about in the beginning. But because you had the modalities of stuff in place, you were able to assess the situation. You and Tiffany made a move, and now you're on the property to where things are working even better than building the property, building the land, doing the things, and being under the thumb of that old bondage, for lack of better terms that coming to my head.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
love that because I think that's entrepreneurship. I think that is building a life you love. There's no rules with it. The only rules are the choices you make and what you hold yourself to. And now, looking back and from what you're saying, it's so much better because you have the land, you have the animals, you have an Airbnb, all the different things that you're wanting to do. It opened up, but it opened up under pressure. That's the part that most people don't like. A lot of times what happens is you get put under all this pressure and you have to make a move or something happens, and then the thing you need comes for you. It's not always rainbows and unicorns. I wish we could make it rainbows and unicorns, but that
Awesome.
makes the good times better though, I think.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting though? Like, I don't know, like every time I feel like I'm like I was telling you about this with the school community, like every time that I get stressed out or like I feel like I'm getting overwhelmed, like overwhelmed, which usually leads to like the emotional block, so anxiety, overwhelm, depression, usually are the emotions that then drive thoughts, right? So that's why the nervous system's so important because if you get these bad emotions constantly, then they drive our thoughts, and our thoughts drive our actions, right?
Hmm.
Beliefs, actions, all that, right? So um I think that was what was so important was because I wasn't allowing the emotions were coming, right? Like the feelings were coming. However, I was able to navigate those feelings a lot better and easier and still get what I wanted without
Hmm.
allowing those emotions to really come back and like self-sabotage me, right? Like for me, which would have been like again, like I used to have really bad anxiety. So like anxiety to a point where I was so crippling that I like didn't even want to go outside, didn't want to get out of bed, was scared like something was going to happen. If I go outside, they're going to catch me, they're going to get me, right? Like all this stuff that
Hmm.
would come up. Um, so I think it's important. Like looking back, we're going now on a year and a half, going on 2 years. But I mean, you looking back, I think the reason that it happened was because I was able to navigate my emotions and not let my emotions drive my limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
And I think because I was able to get past because I was able to deal with the root cause of the emotion, then the limiting beliefs never came, or they didn't come as viciously as they normally came.
Hmm.
And then it allowed me to maintain the new identity that I had created because the new Sid, didn't fall for that trap. The new Sid didn't, and it kind of like gave me an easier way. Like I use this word very gingerly because I think some people look at it as woo-woo, but I definitely believe in it. It's like, I feel like it made it a lot easier to manifest what I had in my
Hmm.
head. Um, because again, the old, some people call it a backpack. Like you'll hear people call it like get off, a lot of people used to tell me to take off the backpack, just like take off your backpack of trauma and emotions. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about, when they would tell me that. But yeah, because I wasn't carrying the emotion anymore, AKA I was able to take off the backpack of old Sid and I was walking around with no backpack. Again, it allowed me a lot easier to manifest because nothing was really in the way anymore. I wasn't dragging my feet to get where I
Mhm.
wanted. And I think like it's such an important thing. Like I think it's a
Yeah.
super important thing for people that are feeling down or feeling like they're like I think a couple of things we constantly hear is you feel stuck, you feel like the walls are closing in, or that the sky is falling. Those are terms that we hear a lot. And I think like to get out of that is you gotta control those emotions because the emotions are what's driving that feeling or driving that belief pattern. And if you to get over them, you have to deal with the emotions, and the emotions are tied directly to the nervous system.
Yeah. No, no, I love that. So we're gonna start landing the plane a little bit. We're not done. I got
Oh
a couple more
man,
questions,
I'm
but
up to plan.
I know. Where can people find you guys at though?
So like I said, we have a school community. I gave you the place they can go. It's a free school
Mhm.
community. Inside, we give out like 9 free courses. Like in there, it's really awesome. Like pe the people that are in the community love it. But it's called the Cycle Breaker Society. So Joe has a link. You just go to cyclebreakersociety.com. He'll probably put it in the show notes here, and you can
Mhm.
go join us there. Or you could just simply go to school and search Cycle Breaker Society. School's a really, really cool place, man. Like Sam did an amazing job with it. But it's a platform that you can download an app or you can go to it on your desktop. And it's kind of like a Facebook group, a Kajabi, a Google Calendar, all built into one. It's really neat because it's very community driven. So, we have people in there that we obviously work with, but then we give away basically, I was talking about earlier, the recalibrate the nervous system, reprogram limiting beliefs, inner child healing, and shift your identity and all that. We walk people through that process inside the community. So everything that I talked about on the show today, they can go and experience these same exercises that I went through, which is going to help them when it comes to getting over getting over self-sabotage and anxiety and the blocks that are causing it. There's many blocks, guys: procrastination, perfectionism, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and on and on and on. But whatever is causing that and causing your self-sabotage, we want to help you. So you can just join us in that community. It's absolutely free. You can get going on our nervous system reset exercises, which is what I was talking about on this show. Box breathing is one of them. And then we just take you through it step by step. And we'd love to have you join us in there. That's where you're going to see me and Tiffany every day. Actually, joking around with Joe, hang out more on school now than I ever do on social media. Because it's kind of like social media, but for learning, which is kind of neat.
Mhm.
So that's where you can find us. That's what we're doing. And yeah, I guess that's us landing. Although I was really
Yeah.
enjoying flying.
Yeah, no, no. And it's really one of the I'm in two school groups. I'm in your group and one other person's school groups, and I'm very selective. It's a great group. You guys should check it out. Just one last question for you. I know we talked about a lot of different things and all. What did we miss? What's on your heart that maybe you need to share to my listeners that maybe we didn't touch on, or maybe even just recap something we did?
Well, I mean, I think for me, as an entrepreneur, and other shows all about reaching $150,000 and stuff like that. And I think without getting political, because I'm not very political at all, but I think, the world's gotten a lot tougher. And I think entrepreneurship has changed ever since 2020. And, simple rule of math here, supply and demand. More people jumped into it in 2020 and it made it a lot more competitive. And I think it can become very easy to start getting down on yourself with self-doubt and second guess. I used to second guess myself a lot. And I think one of the biggest things really to take a look at that I would say is, to get out of this is, get yourself into positions that are going to help you succeed. Like what I mean by that is I was talking a little bit earlier about being in nature, and Joe's talking about being in nature and, around the right people, right? I think like, yeah, people are going to talk to you, get around, like these massive mentors and stuff like that. But I understand that not everybody has the ability to do that. I didn't have the ability to do that for a while. So I think at the end of the day, look at what you can, the communities that you can get around, people that you can get around, like Joe. I mean, like me and Joe clicked off because, I mean, if you haven't heard Joe, he's like the most infectious person you'll ever meet in a good way. But I mean, like, what I mean by that is get around people like Joe and then figure out how you can help. I think at the end of the day, we get so stuck in making money, having sales calls, like the tactical parts of all of this. When at the end of the day, all the number one thing that's always helped me and has helped Tiffany, and she'll tell you this when she hops on, is we're honestly just out there looking to help. Like we just want to help. Like, whether they pay us or not, we want to be able to, the way we want to contribute to society is we want to help people with the challenge that we can help solve to the problem that we've been through ourselves. And I think at the end of the day, if you can kind of look at it from that frame and just remember that whatever you're going through right now, this was a real big one for me. Whatever I was going through, I realized that it was the worst that it was ever going to be in that moment. So that means the next step I take is going to get easier. And the next step I take is going to get easier. So by kind of shifting that mental frame and being like, hey, I feel this crappy. Well, understand this is the crappiest you're going to feel if you take action on what it is that you want right now, whatever that is, whether it's $150,000, like Joe talks about on the show, whether it's doubling your income, whether it's moving out to the boonies like we did, right? And living on all this land surrounded by coyotes and bears, like whatever that is, like the thought and the feeling that you have right now, whether it's loss, self-doubt, and whatever that is, that's the heaviest that's going to be right now, as long as you take action on it today. And if you take
Right.
action on it, and Joe talks a lot about this, you take action on it today, you build momentum. 1% better,
Mhm.
1% better, 1% better. And every single day, more clarity and ease comes with it. I talked about it on this show with the school community. I had to get over that first day. And once I got over that first day, the second day got easier, third day got easier. And now we have a community that's driving us. And this is what's great is automatically through evergreening. We do a lot of evergreening and automation in the community. I don't have to chase after calls or appointments anymore. We're getting 10 to 12 a week right now.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
awesome. And like if I hadn't have gotten over that initial hump and just like I'm gonna do this imperfectly, I think like I'd still be stuck in that shit looking at a blank page. So I think at the end of the day, and it's a simple one, it's just like, put yourself in the right environments and, like everything you want to do becomes a lot easier and then simply just do it. Like, I know that's like super simple, but I mean, like, results happen to people who take action and better results come to people who take immediate action. So I think, whatever it is you want that's on your head, don't think about what you got to do or how perfect it needs to be. Just what's the first thing you got to do? Do it.
Mhm.
And I think that's helped me in a lot of stuff, man, and it's helped me feel better because my confidence was always gained through doing really cool shit and then being able to talk about it. And it didn't matter if it was done perfectly; it was just a matter that I did it. So I think like
Yeah,
that's something I think a lot of people need to hear is just do cool shit and talk about it. Your confidence will go through the roof.
I love it. Thank you, Sid, for being on the show. And like you said, take action. Actions will get you farther than thinking about it, looking at it, wondering about it, thinking if it's perfect, doing it. Every step you take each day gets you one step closer to the life you love waking up to. And until next time, go do the thing you need to do that will make you happy.
Absolutely.